Hello Galactic family. Some time ago, as I flipped through one of the ethereal libraries, I found an interesting story. She had many details and really filled a whole book, but I would like to share the highlights with you here as it seems relevant and timely. A story of the master. Yes, she was an impetuous girl, always ahead in line, the first in line for the next adventure and immediately ready to explore the next amazing thing. As you can imagine, this enthusiasm has created some fabulous stories, not to mention some adventures of standing hair and the calamities of freezing bones along the way. Lives were lived, adventures were taken advantage of, and then something inside her knew it was time to start returning home. This new part of her journey would begin with a life of entrancing awakening, and she plunged deep. This thing called the church was still fresh and new, still shining with the discoveries of truth, so that's when it began. By registering with the local convent at the first possible moment, she committed herself to the service of the divine. But over time and with increasing dismay, she began to notice cracks in the facade, inconsistencies in the stories, and rust on the halos. When she could not take it any longer, she pointed the obvious, and quickly found her head rolling away from her shoulders. That was not what she expected. But, unperturbed and almost without thinking, she jumped in again, and this time determined to catch the absurd a little earlier and keep her head a little more. Somewhere along the way, she met an old friend, a companion who was also on the path of awakening and discovered a shared passion for truth and revolution. Together with some friends of like mind, they began to foment a rebellion against the powers that prevailed. They were powerful powers, however, and eventually they caught up with her. Thrown into the dungeon and without their hands, they let her rot while the mice nibbled at her ears. Again, it was not exactly what she imagined, but, persistent as ever, she moved away, found new parents, took a deep breath, and plunged again. Third time is correct, right? This time the two old friends grew almost side by side, and during long conversations under the old oak they opened the delicate coals of curiosity to the flames of knowledge. The change was in progress and they could feel it. He went to join the church this time, wanting to be where the action was, but it did not last long. Led by his own awakening and unable to conform to the status quo, he was soon running away. Then, one day, his little band passed by the village and told everything about what happened. Things were not going so well at home and her restlessness was on the peak, so she dropped everything and ran to join La Resistance. In fact, it was raging all over the land and many more began to join in the cause, though a little sneakier this time, thanks to the inherent care they brought from previous misadventures. But the powers were getting more stealthy as well, and one day while they were on a recon mission, she and a small band of renegades fell straight into a trap. During all this time, his faith grew, along with a great deal of optimism, and this arrest was only a brief setback. She saw this as a small price to pay to spread the truth and even an opportunity to share with a whole new audience. Finding herself back in the dungeon but managing to keep her hands this time, she worked hard to keep all the spirits up. They sang, prayed, trusted and wept, waiting for their day in court, when everything would be right. Certain that her eloquence would make hearts open, a Holy Spirit to illuminate the proceedings and make all see the light, she anticipated only freedom. Finally the day came. She was taken before the magistrate and interrogated for hours, answering question after question about what she believed, what she knew, whom she loved and whom she trusted. Of course she answered sincerely, for he did not say, "The truth will set you free?" Her interrogators occasionally smiled and nodded and, as the day wore on, She was certain that their eyes began to shine with the light of truth. Victory and freedom were surely close. In fact, she could barely feel the ropes that held her, almost waiting for them to evaporate at any moment. If you told us where your leader is, we would like to know you and confess our newfound faith. She was careful not to hand over this particular secret, but now, exhausted from the ordeal and applauded for her obvious sincerity, she was certain of the victory. Of course, dear reader, you can see the trap. A banana peel tossed right under her shoe, a carefully crafted bait for her to fall, hook, line and weights. With the glow of the spirit on her face, she took a deep breath and finally shared it all. Such eloquence had never graced the court. The room was silent when her story ended and she smiled, waiting for the ropes to be released, ready for that step to freedom. And then the hammer hit. Quickly found guilty of treason and blasphemy, in addition to helping to instigate the enemy and various other lewd and malicious accusations, they decided to make her an example. No effort was spared, and after an endless night of knives and whips, macaws, wheels, and more, they dragged her out through the square to the pile of wood and stake. Roughly mending the open wound so that she would not bleed to death too soon, they spread the word and waited for the sunset, while the crowd gathered to watch the show. Yes, somewhere between the hammer and the stake, she realized how foolish she had been. If I had been smarter and kept my mouth shut, she moaned, or even told a few lies, anything but what I said, none of this would be happening. His agony was unbearable, but this added insult to injury when they paraded with his friend and other comrades who had been quickly captured, bound, and gagged by his eloquent testimony. Shame and guilt were almost worse than physical torment. The sunset finally came, the flames began to rise, and when his wounded and broken body succumbed to a last round of anguish, the devil was finally born. Never! He shouted from inside her. Never, never, never again. It was his dying oath. Forgetting that never is the surest way to bring it all back again. She wandered for a few more lives. There was a little more torment, some hidden and infuriated, and then she decided to try it one more time. This time she would do it differently and she would not be sucked so easily. She would reconnect with all the old comrades, even that great old friend she had delivered, but this time she would keep her mouth shut. There had already been enough drama, pain, and suffering. She would not do it again. This time she would remember. There was a family she knew too well, some of them had even been their tormentors in the past, but it was an easy entry and would provide an opportunity to settle some accounts, so she went. And it was true. This time she barely forgot. She was practically born looking for and finally found her people. In fact, her dear friend led the cause one more time, and that old family passion came when she felt compelled to join. But this time, it was only for her. There would be no more proselytizing. She did not care if anyone was interested or not, and she was not about to tell anyone. This lesson had been learned, completely. They reconnected, but it took a while to get to the friends part again, because somewhere deep down she was still suspicious. Keep the secret. Do not let anyone know. An urgent inner voice said, even as another voice said, "You're safe this time and there's nothing to hide." But her passion was clear, her knowledge strong, and once again she found herself in the middle of the action. Still taking care of the old wounds, she kept mostly to herself, staying at the bottom and supporting the banks. There would be no more waste of air trying to convert someone. This time it was personal. She absolutely knew that this time they would finally see it, they would finally prove what they always knew. Then something happened, something so unexpected that it took her breath away. Suddenly, the microphone was on her face, all eyes were on her, and the question was, who is it? Once again, they wanted to know, who are you connected to? Who inspires you? Who is your oldest friend? His initial response was forgotten, thanks to thousands of aspects on red alert, and it seemed that the question was being asked through the centuries. The alarms were deafening, the internal hurricane at level 5. What on earth do I say this time? She thought. I've been here before and it was not pretty. Then another part of her stepped forward. Come, my dear. It's time to be free. You've faced the worst. There is nothing else to lose except your limitations. Maybe the truth really set you free. She took a deep breath, and once again named the one who had inspired her all her life, who had been a friend on every occasion, who understood the passion for truth better than any other being. Was made. After so many, never again did she really say that out loud, and now she was preparing for the hammer, the whip, the fire, the hell. With her heart racing and her nerves crunched, she braced herself for the worst, but never came. In fact, nothing really happened. Saw? Cried the master himself. I told you we were safe now. Slowly, returning to her body, she marveled at how suddenly life seemed so different. After confronting me with this story, I just had to know more, so I traced the author and she agreed to answer a few more questions. At the top of the list, of course, was, what happened after that? The next few weeks were quite interesting, she replied. I really did release, in a way that I had never done before. I had already left out many people, things and situations in that last life. It was sometimes easy, sometimes extremely difficult, but it had reached a point where I did not know what else could be left to release. Then came the moment to discover a gigantic fear and to continue walking, instead of obeying it. This really changed everything. Somehow, after that, I could finally truly release completely. I discovered that the ties that attached me to other people were not what I thought they were. I thought it was love, trust, affection and all that, but, as Tobias said years ago, true love has no connection. On the contrary, it was the guilt, the shame, the debt, and the judgment that limited me. I had already released a lot of all this, but this was a deep release, well from the core. And then came the greatest sense of freedom I've ever felt. I realized that what people think is most precious is exactly what they will have to let go of, sooner or later. It is not because these things hinder you or are not good for you, but rather that you have bonded with them in some interesting ways. You simply cannot be free while you are so deeply connected or connected to someone outside you. But does not it hurt to let go? I asked. Ah, she said, that's when I discovered the beautiful secret. The pain of releasing comes from pulling the things that are still connected. When you truly and completely release, the pain goes away as well. It's the difference between pulling something which is hooked on you versus simply removing the hook. I thought it would be the most distressing thing I've ever done, but that was only true when I wanted to keep holding things, even if just a little bit. It may seem difficult to release old friends, loved ones, precious beliefs, habits, identities and possessions, but in fact do not have to hurt. Freedom, which you give to yourself in return, is absolutely priceless. I thanked her for her time and got up to leave. One last thing, she smiled. I also discovered that it all comes back to you in a whole new way, without pain or distortion and in absolute freedom. Tell your readers that if something hurts, it's just a sign that a bond is being pulled. Or what you're pulling in, Just disengage yourself from everything and you will quickly move from pain to freedom. Then you will wonder why you waited so long. I'll have to check out this library again. There must be a lot of good stories there.